calls for restructuring Nigeria is once again receiving a boost as the 2019 elections inches closer.
That's correct. Politicians have incorporated restructuring as part of their campaign strategies, dangling it before the electorate as a catch to garner votes. Well, the restructuring debate is now ever more heated following the back and forth between former Vice President and 2019 presidential aspirant Atiku Abubakar and incumbent Vice President Yemi Osinbajo. While Atiku is all for restructuring and sees it as a necessity, Osinbajo feels otherwise.
Now, the incumbent Vice President says restructuring in whatever shape or form will not mean much if political leaders continue to see public resources as an extension of their bank accounts. Restructuring was one of the recommendations of delegates of the 2014 confab as a panacea to Nigeria's growth and development. But will this present administration heed the unending calls for restructuring is the big one and the big question Nigerians are looking at. Now, we have a lawyer with us in the studio, someone who has been following this as well. Curtis Adigba is here with us in the studio. Curtis, good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Yes.
You're welcome.
All right. When it comes to the issue of restructuring, restructuring has happened before in Nigeria, so it's not new. The call for restructuring is also not new. Remember when we were transiting from the parliamentary system to the presidential system, even though the military was the one handing it over to us in 1979, it was a major restructuring Nigerians had never seen before. So we've seen all of those. But the present call for restructuring, a lot of politicians seem to understand or see it from different perspectives where it seems it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone.
And there lies the confusion about what restructuring is for many people.
Right.
So what is restructuring depends on who is talking about it.
Right.
For some, it's about devolution of power, getting the other arms of government to perform some of the functions that the federal government is carrying out at the moment, and inefficiently so. For others, it's about going back to regional arrangement. Do you understand? And for most people, it's about creating more states.
Wow.
So once you talk about restructuring, it's about creating states. And look, but the reality confronting us is that there is this insincerity of purpose about restructuring in this country. And that is why the cause for restructuring is seasonal. Now we're closing on an election, so you're going to hear all kinds of politicians, even people who don't even understand what the issues are, talking about it because it's a selling point. You know, we are the one who want to create a new state for you. I'll give you a few examples. When Obasanjo was president, there was an attempt to somehow restructure the country by way of constitutional amendment. In those amendments, there was one, which was the abolition of tenure for the president. We then viewed it as third term. The former vice president, who is now a presidential aspirant, if I led the group and led Nigerians to oppose that amendment. And what happened? We threw away the entire amendment because of just one clause that was rejected. Just that purpose. And thereafter we had other calls. Very recently, I mean, there was a bill that was brought to the National Assembly to even try and devolve power, create state police, give more power to the local government and all that. The same people opposed it. But they are now the front leaders of those calling for restructuring. Why? Because it's something they can take home to their people and say, look, if you re-elect us, we'll be doing this on your behalf. But there's lack of purpose, lack of sincerity as far as this is concerned.
Well, the vice president did submit that, look, whether you talk about economic restructuring, political restructuring, or whatever it is, if there is no change in attitude of political leadership, it will mean nothing. So there is a sense in which he's right in saying that.
Oh, I agree perfectly with Vice President Osinbajo. In fact, I've gone ahead of him to say we have to restructure the minds of the people first, because human beings operate the system. It's not about just structural changes. You can change all the structures for all you care. But the fact is that those who will govern those systems if their minds are not changed, you are not going to go anywhere. And like he said, when we didn't have so much of the political talk on restructuring, at the time that this country had moved forward and achieved concrete things in the past, there was not so much talk about restructuring. What we had then was better use of our resources to solve problems. Look, I will even advocate that what we need to restructure is the cause of our governance. Therein lies the problem. And I'll give you a few examples. We created offices that don't give us value and yet take so much from the national economy. I argued somewhere before, and I'm going to argue it here. Why do we have the office of the President of the Senate in Nigeria? We took the system of government, preferential system from the United States. The President of the Senate is also the Vice President of the country. He doubles. So what happens is he goes to the Senate only to cast the vote when there is a tie. And so you cut out that. From 1999 up and until now, we've had problems with that office, either in terms of cost, in terms of power exercise, and everything. You also don't have the Deputy Senate President in the United States. What you then have is the majority leader. And he is from the party that has got the majority in the Senate. That is the party affair. So it's not the entire Senate affair to elect a leader. And the minority will appoint their own leader. Now, we cut out those two offices. And then you also cut out the office of Deputy Speaker. It's not, these are big ticket offices as far as resources of the country we're talking about. We're not prepared to make these changes. We are not prepared to cut down the salaries of our public officers as if the economy is about them alone and not about the people.
Well,
when it comes to the issue of the office of the Senate President and Deputy Senate President and Speaker, Deputy Speaker and all of that, one would argue too that in as much as we copied the presidential system of government, we had to work it to fit into our own peculiar political system.
Yes, I agree with you, but you see, the United States economy is a much, much bigger economy. And they are doing this to cut down costs and avoid duplicity. Now, what we have done is to say, okay, let's adopt something that suits us, create positions to give a sense of belonging. But that has not achieved that purpose. Rather, what we see is that there is increasing division in the polity. And so we'll begin to think, and the purpose of experience is that two people don't have to suffer the same fate to learn one lesson. So they have done it, they've learned the lesson, we should learn from them.
Yeah, but don't you think really that one way or the other, I agree with you that these things are expensive the way we run it. But when you talk about the issue of sense of belonging, don't you think he has also achieved its purpose? Because one way or the other, Nigerians see Nigeria sometimes as the House of Fulani in the north, Yoruba in the west, and then Igbo in the southeast, and that's it. Meanwhile, there are so many minorities that originally, if you allow free and fair, they may never get to some of these offices.
Mike, let me tell you, the reason why we are overtly concerned about who occupies what is because we tend to tie benefit to those offices directly to the people they represent, which is not true. You and I come from the same place. How have we benefited as a people from occupying certain offices in Nigeria? You know it. You know what I'm saying? Look, if we have a system that takes care of everybody, an inclusive system, a dragnet, you know, like they will say, a rising tide lifts up all boats. If we have that, nobody cares. Who is the Senate President? Who is the President? Who is the Deputy Vice President? Look, the parties, the reason why we are very, 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 very careful about these things and we talk about it as if our life depends on them is because we think that if a man from my place is a Senate President, then there's a level of access
to government
that he gives me.
Resources.
But we have seen that is not so. Now, who is it? You know, when people go out to do things to solve a problem, with sincerity, you will see it. The last conference agreed on one issue, among so many others. He said we have 6 geographical zones. One of the zones, the Southeast, has got only 5 states. We need to create one more state to balance it. Nobody is talking about that. You know what happened? when they sat down to write their report, they recommended creation of additional 18 states. How do you restructure a country? You restructure a country through a bill, either from the executive or from the legislature themselves or from citizens making a suggestion. No country is created or born perfect. That's why you've got the amendment provision in the Constitution. You see the United States Constitution. The founders sat down and framed that Constitution. They knew it was not perfect. And they'll tell you, we are working towards a more perfect union. And so we've had several amendments. First Amendment, Second Amendment.
To accommodate
some of these things they see. Look, we also had amendments here. But what are we amending? Every time we sit down to amend, it's either the personal benefits of some people or what we are doing to score cheap political points. And we told them with speed. But when it comes to the real issue, can you imagine for a moment that we have a country where even State House of Assemblies rejected an amendment to the Constitution that would have given them independence? This is one country that once people are elected to offices, specifically senators and their governors, they never agree on anything. So how can they even work to identify common problems and provide common solutions? But we play politics with people's lives just because it suits our purpose, and that's all, nothing more than that.
Well, you know, Curtis, we're talking about restructuring at the moment, and you remember, as all of us here do, that look, it's not the first time. It's becoming like a political tool, which is given to the mass of the people, and then they buy it, you know, just to get votes for themselves. You remember that this administration talked about restructuring. They brought in LRFI to chair the committee, you know, and then come out with reports and all of that. Why does it seem like they are not able to gather the political courage to, see through?
That's why I talked about sincerity of purpose. As soon as the LRFI committee unveiled this report, the first thing you heard was some opposition political parties saying, we know this is just a gimmick for election purposes. And that has been the problem. The same thing happened during the Jonathan conference, where they said, oh, it's too close to the election, we cannot do anything fundamentally with that report and all that, and that it was just an attempt to curry political favor. Now, and that's why I've said, for Nigeria to move forward, we've got to find people who will identify causes that are bigger than them and pursue them. Because, see, what we have found is that we elect people to solve our problems. Then they become the problems that we need to solve. As disheartening as it is true. Now, we're talking every day about political crisis. Who is fighting who? Who is planning to impeach? Who is planning to dump one party and the other? There is no talk about the real issues. It's just like projects. I can tell you, I can pinpoint to some projects that were part of the promises in 1999, and they are still part of the promises for 2019 election. Because what we do every year is, when budgets are submitted, we partially defund some of those projects so that they are not complete, and then we can begin to
justify
and refer to them and say, this is what we will do. Let me tell you, if the National Assembly that we have today is sincere about restructuring this country or about devolving power to the arms, to different types of government, we will do it. And let me give you an example. Some years ago, there was a talk about independence for the local government. Because, without a local government system, we cannot do much. All the talk about restructuring, we just hang in the air if the local governments don't have their independence.
Because they are closer to the people.
To the people. And that's why they were created. Now, let me tell you what happens at the moment. For most states, the local government chairmen don't get to see their funds because of the joint account system. So it stops at the state capital.
Exactly.
And that's why the governors are happy.
And they give them crumbs.
Yes, that's why the governors are happy to appoint interim chairmen for local governments or arrange a group of people that they must find a way to declare as winners. That's why you find in a state, if APC is in charge of that state, they win all the local government elections. If PDP, the same thing. You just wonder as if the opposition party disappeared overnight from the face of the map. That is because they want to control the funds of the local government. The chairman of local governments don't have access to their funds. They just take the little that they are required to go and pay salaries.
Pay salaries.
No projects. Now, when there was a call to grant them independence, governors across party lines opposed it. They opposed. They said, no, we don't. There is no system of government known as local government. But local government is one system of government that has got specific responsibility in our constitution. How they will manage local markets and do all that.
On the fourth schedule.
All the talk about restructuring that you are hearing is not more than one, devolution of power. Let the governors be more powerful. Let them have state police. So they can, they tell you, they tell us is, we'll provide security for our state because policing is a local affair. That's true. But that's not the intention. The intention is to be in control of a force that they can use to muzzle the opposition. And so there are a lot of things that we should be talking about, even before we talk about restructuring.
All right. In this restructuring that everyone is talking about, now you mentioned earlier about agreeing with the fact that it is even the restructuring of the mind that is even most important, because when we geographically restructure or we fiscally restructure, as the case may be, or administratively,
we restructure the problems.
Exactly. The problem will still be there as far as it's the same mindset.
I agree with you.
Who really would champion this restructuring the way we are now in the complex society like Nigeria that we find ourselves? Even if it's the restructuring of the mind, who will champion it?
Well, I think the APC government is doing something about restructuring the mind to say, listen, public funds don't belong to you, even if you occupy that office. Has their service been perfect? No, but it's a step in the right direction, because I believe that progress is incremental. All we need to have is another group of people who will come and build on the little successes they have attained. Now, number two, you have to find men, like I said, who believe in causes bigger than them. Look at what happened in Senegal. The president, Macky Sall, knew that his economy was fragile. He couldn't continue, to fund two chambers of the National Assembly.
Exactly.
And then he approached the guys and said, look, we need to do something. And they decided to take out the Senate and leave the House of Representatives, which represents the people more. And then he also went ahead to cut down the tenure of the president from 7 to 5 years. That is when you find an individual who is living for a cause bigger than him.
Starting with himself.
Starting with himself. Now, when you are living for causes that are not bigger than yourself and not bigger than your party and lower than the country that you call your own, you have the kind of dysfunction that we have in the country.
Well, the president some time ago did say that, look, the unity of the country is not negotiable. Do you agree with that assertion?
I don't believe that anything in the world is not negotiable. Even with debt, you can negotiate. I've said it to people. If they say to you, the way you are, you're going to die in the next few months, and you have the resources, there are ways that can slightly give you more time, push you forward to be able to put your house in order. So I think that statement is too extreme. I think Nigerians should be able to sit down. Look, part of the problem we have in this country today is that there was no time that we agreed to say we should come together and form a country. We were brought together, we agreed reluctantly, and we've not moved forward from that spot. So I think we need to sit down and create a country, create a vision for a country that we all can have a part in and work for. What we have right now, is a gathering of people who will never agree on anything because they see themselves as local champions and people coming from different parts of the country.
In their various enclaves.
We need to come together and say, look, this is who we are.
Right. But isn't that what the confab was arranged, where people came together? We've had about 2 or 3 confabs now to look at the holistic problem, challenge, and then, charter a way forward.
The problem with the confab, it was not a people's confab.
Okay.
Those who argued against the constitution that we have right now, they have argued on just one point, that the military gave us that constitution and the people were not involved. Now, when you look at the confab, how were the representatives elected or chosen?
They were basically appointed.
They were appointed. By who? Who gave him the power?
All right.
All right.
So it suffers from the same legitimacy issue.
All right.
Okay.
Well,
we have to
Curtis,
leave it here now.
Curtis Adigba, a lawyer, a constitutional lawyer, well, thank you very much indeed for coming to share your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.